Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon to you all. From those down the road to the folks around the world. Welcome back to another Wednesday weekly video. Now, a recent story has been whipping around the media in the past week regarding to a piece of historical paraphernalia of significant interest to the English story. I am of course talking about the Spanish Armada maps. These 7 individual maps go through a detailed play-by-play, engagement-by-engagement account of the travelling and the battles between the English and the Spanish fleets as they travelled from the coast of Cornwall, where they were first spotted in late July of 1588, right up until the final engagement off the coast of Gravelines in France, which is obviously a short distance from the English coast, where the English used their fire ships to scatter and panic the Spanish Armada, and therefore easy pickings for the English to deal with. Now, these maps do not detail the subsequent escape or the subsequent return trip by the Spanish Armada back to Spain. These are a very English constructed piece of historical documentation. It has a very English feel to it. Obviously, it's going to be incredibly biased towards the English side of the story. But nevertheless, these maps are different to any sort of Armada-based paraphernalia or object that has come before, because a lot of the accounts that we have are either shipwrecks off the coast of the south of England and, of course, around Scotland and Ireland during that return trip, or through handwritten accounts by people that were there at the time or by documenters, chroniclers from that time. This is a very different visual representation and is immediately significant to the English story. Now, these maps were left in a dusty room at a country estate for almost or over 400 years and had been largely forgotten by the general public as well as the historical community. Up until a few years ago, as I said, they were forgotten, but then they were put up for sale and they were bought by a foreign investor and were due to be shipped out abroad from England. But the British government stepped in, halted this process and raised £600,000 to save these maps for the British nation. Now, of course, if you would like to go and see these particular maps, then you can do a quick Google search once you have finished this video. But I want to go through some of the contextual points surrounding this particular event. I want to go through the 2 whys and answer these questions. Why did the Spanish Armada fail in its attempts to invade England? And more importantly, why did Spain feel the need to invade England at this point in history? Hopefully, when you go and view these particular maps, this series of maps, this video will help you give a better interpretation or a further interpretation on your own ideas surrounding this event and surrounding these maps in particular. So, let's get on with it. Now, in order to answer these 2 questions, I need to first go back 50 years to 1536. Because in that year, that was when Henry VIII decided to create the Church of England, making himself the sort of figurehead and leader of this Christian branch, and the Pope no longer has anything to do with the Christian and religious sort of laws and regulations occurring within England. That was all down to the monarch. This is where the beginnings of dissent between Spain, the Pope, and England come into place. But in 1553, when Mary I came to the English throne, Mary was a devout Catholic, and she returned England back to its Catholic status quo. King Philip II of Spain then married the Queen of England. This was not taken very well by the English people, as Spain already had a number of major territories that it already ran, and there was the fear that should Mary die, Philip would just add England to its already growing influence within Europe. But political nuances and certain clauses to their marriage meant that this never happened, because in 1558 Elizabeth I came to the throne of England, and within a year she returned England back to the Church of England or Protestant Christian sect. This is now where we get a little bit finer in the details, because in 1570 the Pope, at the time Pope Sixtus V, decided to excommunicate Queen Elizabeth I. This meant that you are a non-person. Excommunication means you're a non-person, a stranger to the Christian faith. You are still a Christian, and you could repent and return to the Catholic faith should you wish, but until such a time, you are a non-person. And this let loose the ability to depose Elizabeth from the English throne and put in a more Catholic-oriented King or Queen of England. Now, by 1585, King Philip II of Spain and Sixtus V collaborated on a plan to invade England, overthrow Queen Elizabeth I, and return England back to its Catholic place in the world. And so, with that agreement set, Philip spent the next year building a series of ships for his Spanish Armada in order to invade England. But despite these religious reasonings, there are also a lot of political nuances and decisions behind this invasion, starting with 1585 and the Dutch Netherlands. Now, Elizabeth I had always been very reluctant to involve herself in costly wars and arguing with neighbouring nations, especially the Spanish throne, which was such a big powerhouse. Spain had invaded the Dutch Republic in 1556 and were ruling the Netherlands as the Spanish Netherlands. And of course, Dutch rebels were fighting against their ruling Spanish counterparts and asked the English for a little bit of assistance. Reluctantly, Elizabeth agreed to the terms. The Treaty of Nonsuch was signed in 1585, and a little bit of assistance, including a series of troops, a bit of arms and armament, were given to the Dutch rebels in order to fight off the Spanish. To Philip II of Spain, this was as bad as declaring war. This was the beginning of that political reasoning. Now, another such political reasoning was the constant attacks by Francis Drake and other privateers of the time against Spanish ships returning from the New World, returning from the Americas. Francis Drake obviously was a notorious privateer and almost a sort of an English folk hero from the time. And when Francis Drake was knighted by Queen Elizabeth, this was again another jab in the side of Philip and another straw that was being pulled. But the final piece and the concluding factor to why Spain decided to invade England was the execution of Mary, Queen of Scots. She was, of course, the Queen of Scotland, and she was a Catholic at heart. There had been minor discussions and little sort of tiffs between England and Scotland during that time, but it came to a head when a conspiracy plot against Elizabeth I was uncovered. This therefore sentenced Mary to death, and with the execution of Mary in 1587 and seemingly no other way in which to return England to a Catholic place, Philip decided that it was time to enact his Spanish Armada plot. King Philip II of Spain spent the majority of 1586 constructing his Spanish Armada, and it was in 1587 that it was largely completed. The plan was for the Spanish to travel up to the Cornish end of the English Channel, sail across, pick up the Spanish invasion force headed by the Duke of Parma at Flanders, and then cross over to England and then begin the invasion. A number of Spanish ships had already been sent to that eastern side of the English Channel, which of course alerted the English to the plan that was the Spanish Armada. Realising this, the English decided to create a beacon system whereby when the Spanish fleet was spotted, a beacon could be lit and a number of subsequent beacons could be sort of alerted and lit, and thereby sort of a signalling system almost. And therefore the nation and the fleet could be alerted and immediately get and attack the Spanish Armada. But in order to buy them a little bit more time, disrupt proceedings a little bit, and perhaps even put the Spanish at a bit of a disadvantage, Sir Francis Drake was sent to the ports of Cadiz and La Coruna in Spain, where the big armada was being kept. He ransacked, destroyed, burnt and looted a number of the Spanish ships, even capturing a couple in the process, therefore almost decimating the Spanish Armada before it even left. It would take until the May of 1588 for the Spanish fleet to come back to its full prowess and continue on with its task. But it wouldn't be until the July of the same year that they would get to that western approach in Cornwall, because the weather was so terrible. Now, the Spanish Armada consisted of 130 ships, 24 of which were warships, manned by 8,500 sailors and 20,000 soldiers. That's obviously not including the invasion force that was to be picked up at Flanders, or by that point Dunkirk, because the plans changed a little bit. The Spanish Armada was spotted off the coast of Cornwall in late July 1588. Queen Elizabeth was quickly informed of this, and the beacons were obviously lit. She travelled down to Tilbury, where a number of her sailors and a number of the fleet was being kept, where she proclaimed her most famous speech. Now, if you have more information on that little speech, or if you know the full prose of that speech, then please do drop a comment below, because I think a lot of people would be very interested to read it. In other sort of scenes of engagement, Sir Francis Drake was playing a game of bowls on the Plymouth Hoe when he was informed about the spotted Spanish Armada. The story goes that he refused to leave and engage with the Spanish Armada until he had finished his game of bowls. Now, whether this is a true story or whether this is some biased, whimsical story to suggest how easy it was to defeat the Spanish Armada, we had time to play bowls, we don't know. We don't know the sort of full story behind that account. Now, the difference between the Spanish ships and the English ships was rather contrasting. The Spanish ships were kept in a tight formation, linked together by cables and ropes, led by a man named Medina Sidonia. They were big ships, but they weren't very manoeuvrable. On the English side, however, the English had about the same number of ships, but were manned by fewer people. These ships were more manoeuvrable. They were smaller. The guns that they had on the ships were able to launch cannon and shot from a larger distance. The Spanish ships weren't quite so good and quite so accurate in their shooting. But despite being spotted in Cornwall and travelling at a reasonable pace along the English Channel, not many of the Spanish ships came under much destruction or capture during that period. It was only by the time you get to France and obviously the site of the major engagement, is when things started to go wrong. The Duke of Parma, who was leading the invasion force that was going to be picked up, had not yet arrived at Dunkirk, where he was due to be picked up. He had been blocked by a number of Dutch rebels, so had to get through them before he could move on to get to his pickup point. Another issue, of course, was the fire ships. At the stroke of midnight on the 8th of August, 1588, a number of English fire ships were sort of drifted out towards the Spanish fleet. Now, of course, being in such a large mass, the fire ships would have done increasing damage to all of the ships, so the ropes were cut. The Spanish ship dispersed, and there was panic and confusion amongst the whole lot. And by the daylight hours of the 8th of August, the English were able to weave and manoeuvre around and basically pick off the Spanish Armada. Realising that this was going horribly wrong, and realising that he could no longer turn around and go back to Spain, the southerly route, Medina Sidonia realised that he would have to go up the eastern coast of England, around Scotland, around Ireland, and then back to Spain. He couldn't land or gain any assistance from the Scots or the Irish, because the Scots were so closely affiliated with the English, and the Irish were in unto themselves their own little entity, despite being sort of Catholic sympathisers, shall we say. Due to bad storms and bad weather, the ships eventually managed to get round. A number of these ships were shipwrecked off the coast of Ireland. Only half of all of the ships in the Spanish Armada made it back, and of the 29,000 individuals that were manning those ships in the Spanish Armada, 20,000 of them perished due to the engagements along the Channel, at the main engagement off the coast of Gravelines in France, and of course trying to get back around. The northerly wind that had sent them fleeing away from the British fleet, or the English fleet, not the British, away from the English fleet, turned into a gale and created even more problems, hence why there was such destruction and weather and so many shipwrecks as they went round these coasts. But on the English side, not a single ship was lost during any of the engagements against the Spanish Armada, not a single one, and only 100 men were lost during those engagements. This story is the pinnacle of British naval ingenuity, and the defeat of the Spanish Armada is a story that has been told many years down the line, a widely celebrated event in English history. But in the immediate aftermath, there had to be some sort of counteraction towards the Spanish Armada. What do you do? You've defeated the Spanish Armada, what do you do? Well, you send your best privateer, Francis Drake, the following year in 1589 to try and invade Spain. But this didn't work. And after a number of sort of backwards and forwards, armadas here, going there, whatnot, over the next 20 or so years, political tensions between England and Spain just sort of calmed down a little bit by 1604. Now, with those questions finally answered, I hope that this video has given you a good springboard to the Spanish Armada period of history, and that when you do go and visualize or look at these maps, the Spanish Armada maps, you get a good or a better understanding of what they're trying to sort of convey and represent. If you have enjoyed this video, then please do consider clicking that little like button, and maybe even click the little subscribe button, because that goes a long way to helping me make more of these videos, and hopefully when this virus crisis is all finished, I'll be able to make more videos that aren't just behind this blank wall, but hopefully going out and showing you the history that is in this world. If there are anything that I might have missed or might have got slightly wrong, then please do drop a comment below. Also in the description below are my social media links. Hopefully I'll sort of start picking those up as the weeks and months go on, especially once this virus crisis is finished. So I'm going to stop talking now. I'm going to leave you all there. I'm going to say stay safe and see you later.